all the forms of Marxism, communism, socialism don't work for Black people because the woo-woo isn't there, the spirituality, the mysticism. And surrealism as a political movement is what works within Black context because it connects us back with the mystical and the spiritual that our radical roots are tied into. But that's...
No, but I mean, that's a clip.
Yeah.
Like, thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, so that's where I mean, a lot of my practice is coming in from that space too. So how do we move sideways? How do we move in that alterity, take the lessons from that, and then move forward? So I don't know that I have a 5-point plan, but in creating my spaces, I'm hoping to keep pushing specifically Black queer imaginations, Black and Indigenous imaginations towards illegibility. Because I think...
Illegibility.
Yeah, I think Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color often, like minoritized folks, are illegible to white supremacist imagination.
Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm your host, Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Leslie Foster. Did you grow up in Columbus?
No, so I have family in Detroit and Columbus. Okay. I grew up, so I was born in Singapore.
Okay.
I grew up in the Philippines, Thailand. Well, not in that order. Let me do it in the order. So I grew up in Indonesia, Michigan, the Philippines, and Thailand.
And Michigan being the most culturally diverse.
Of course, absolutely.
Like, no, so you're a third culture kid.
I'm a third culture kid.
That's why we vibe on politics.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
You've been outside of the U.S. and you've seen how horrible we are.
Though I always also point out, I've also seen how horrible everybody else is too.
Yeah.
Like one of my reasons my parents moved there, specifically my mom, is that, because of a desire to avoid anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness is everywhere, and that was the sort of heartbreaking discovery.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we can move on. We don't have to go right into the heart of my politics.
Oh no,
and talk about
I love it.
But okay. And then so then when was the art?
I'd always thought of myself as an artistic person, but that was a really internal conversation. It wasn't like the version of myself that I put out in the world. I had this plan. I want to do something that's still creative, but can essentially allow me to be able to make money, and then I can do art things after that.
Yeah.
And in 11-year-old Leslie brain, what that looks like is I'm going to do aeronautical engineering because planes seem cool and sort of artistic to design them.
Yeah.
And I'm decent at the science and the math thing too. So let's just combine it. And then I think we're not wealthy people, and most of the aeronautical engineering schools are super expensive.
Yeah.
But there is one free one in the U.S., Air Force Academy.
Wait, were you in the Air Force?
I was not.
Okay, shit.
We'll get there.
I did not expect this.
No, but as an 11-year-old, I think I'm going to go to Air Force Academy. I get my free education. I get training as an aeronautical engineer. After I serve, I can work for NASA, Boeing, whatever.
Yeah.
Make money. And then I'll do art things. I'll build my little art collective. I literally was drawing art communes as a 10-year-old.
Okay.
And it's a ridiculous idea, but you're 11 years old. And I stuck to that plan until I was 17, which meant I finished high school early. I started studying biology in college, not to do biology, but because I really wanted a good educational CV to be able to get into Air Force Academy. And so somewhere in the middle of that, my sophomore year of college, before I'm thinking about transferring in, I go to Austria and then Germany for a year to pick up a language skill. I'd been studying German since elementary school. And I was like, I really just want to be able to speak it fluently, and that also will look good at my educational CV. So I moved to Austria 8 days before 9/11 happens. And at this point, I'm 17. I'm already really suspicious of my motives in doing this. I'm like, I don't want to be in the Air Force. Why? How did I set myself up? But I'm on momentum now. Inertia has happened. There's nothing stopping it. 9/11 is the wall that stops my inertia. Because at that point, I'm like, there's no way I want to be involved in the military at this point. I didn't want to be for the last 3 years, but this felt like the path.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And so I spend just months in complete angst. And I was really lucky to have a cohort of other language students who were a bunch of artists. And so I'm starting to see them and it hits me also just in the trauma of 9/11, I was like, I could die tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I would be working to do something that I loved instead of just doing the thing I loved. Maybe I should just do the thing I love.
Yeah.
Screw making money, screw being practical. And that's the thing that kind of shifts everything. And so I'm trying to figure out, what does that look like? And so after 6 months of me just being miserable, my roommate, who's also an American, Chris, is just hey, shut up, stop whining. I'm really tired of you whining about this. what do you love? And I'm like, fashion, I like literature, I like art, I like dance. And he was like, oh, you put that together and that's film.
Mm-hmm.
And I have maybe the only light bulb moment like that I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
Just like, boom, of course it is.
So thanks to this roommate and
Yeah.
Osama bin Laden.
Right, exactly. Should put that in every book, right? Every show I have just like on the wall text. Yeah, no, that did it. And like light bulb moment. And for me, I'd always been searching for the medium. What's the medium? And no medium ever felt right until I heard that. And so I went to film school then. So I transferred to a film school in the US in Tennessee. I didn't go to film school necessarily to work in the industry. I wanted to do it as a medium. Here's the medium that I want to pick up. But again, like I wasn't that exposed to video art. The school I went to was really phenomenal as far as being practical. You had to do a lot of art classes, drawing and sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
But like once you got into the film stuff, it was super practical. And so I'm doing these like weirdo video art things that like nobody in the film school got, but thankfully gave me the room to do. But like I really didn't have anybody introduce me to the notion of like video art within the fine art world. And so I thought I'll carve out a corner for myself in the film world to do weirdo stuff. End up working in London for a year after I graduate doing music videos. And just traveling around, like doing music videos in Poland and Serbia. It was like a weird year. I get fired.
You're like an international man of mystery.
A little bit. I try. I end up getting fired by my boss after my first year for not lying to customs about something he'd wanted to like sneak past. And so my stuff is still in my flat in London. And I'm here on Christmas vacation in the States. And like all my stuff's back in my flat and I'm stranded here. And so I spend a month just sort of kicking around in Tennessee where I went to school, just crashing on couches. And eventually friends from art school and film school who'd moved to LA were like, hey, just move out here.
And then, so wait, you said you had mentioned that it was accidental. How did that? So
I wasn't planning on being fired. Like I literally was like about to go to the airport when he called me. I was like, I need you to do this. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that for you.
And then he just fired you on the spot.
And he fired me over the phone.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was just like,
man,
I guess I'm not going back to
I'm
London.
So glad that I'm not the only person that's ever been fired unfairly over some bullshit, over some criminal shit. Yeah.
Absolutely criminal.
Oh God.
So so I ended up back in Tennessee, and then after a month to LA, crash on a couch in the same building that I live in, on the first floor here. We're in the third floor now. To crash on the first floor with a friend of a friend. And then when this apartment opened up, moved in, and I've been there ever since. So it's been 15 years. So and then being in LA, slowly getting introduced to the art world. And I was like, because I worked in production for a while and I was miserable. I was good at it, but I was miserable. I was like, this is not what I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
I want to be making art. Tried to start my own nonprofit that I mentioned at the beginning, Traveling Muse.
And sorry, you actually didn't get to explain that because I was trying to figure out what level ground was.
Right. So Traveling Muse was a nonprofit. It still exists, but it was a nonprofit that was built around the idea of basically mentoring young artists as they worked through creating experimental films and experimental documentaries.
Okay.
And we kind of just bit off more than we can chew. Did a documentary about violent homophobia in Jamaica. So in 2011, I spent 5 weeks undercover in Jamaica shooting this. Had the funding up to that point, got home and just could not find funding for post. And I think that sort of just like cratered the nonprofit. It still exists. Pavel, who actually was the chair of the board, is actually taking it over now. And he has some really cool things planned. So I'm excited about what happens now. It's been kind of on ice for a decade. But yeah, that kind of was my last ditch attempt to kind of like do art in the film world. And at the point I was just like, I'm really not here for this anymore. I had a friend who was a curator, Sarah Kono. I always shout her out because like where I am in art is like largely thanks to her.
That's my Molly Shoelace. Molly Schulman is mine.
yeah. But like Sarah was like, I've seen your college work. You should be doing stuff in art space. I have a show that I'm curating. You should be in the show. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and I told her no. And then she kept sending me Nike swooshes on my phone, like, just do it, just do it, just do it, just do it. And I got this idea. I called my friend Scott, who was a collaborator, and I was like, Scott, I think we have to do this. And we went out, shot a thing. We built a whole installation. I'd always wanted to do installation art, hadn't had a chance to do it. We built it in this gallery, and I just like, I remember an opening night going, this is it. Like, it was a smaller light bulb moment, but it was like, I found the dialect. Mm-hmm. I found the language when I discovered it was like film was my medium. Now I know the dialect, and that includes sculpture and installation, and that's kind of the course I've been on ever since.
What do you like about installation? Because I also relate to that. Like there's something about organizing a space just the way you want it that is like like a little kid in your bedroom. Like,
right. I mean, there's a few things to it, right? There's kind of a few levels to it. One, I just like creating an experience, and I like being multisensory. Like I had a show at the Torrance Art Museum in 2019 where I like covered the floor in like crushed cedar and rosemary and moss, and so like you smelled it, and it's like I'm creating memory and scent. There's also something I think within kind of like my own Black radical tradition of just like subverting the Cartesian 90-degree angle space of the museum and the gallery and kind of your white box of a gallery.
Cartesian is like a mathematical term, right?
Right, a mathematical term. Like, you know, your right angles and all of that. And like you're very precise kind of, and just being like, let me put up like spiral chambers and fabric.
Spiral chambers.
Yeah, so chambers that you can have spiral into to walk into to kind of get to the center. And just like ways to kind of break up those surfaces and take up space. And so I like being able to kind of like, I'm not putting myself on a wall. I'm literally going to take up space in the middle of your gallery. And I sort of love the potential subversion of that. I'm not going to say it necessarily in essence is a subversive act, but you can make it a subversive act.
Yeah, definitely. So your background, are you like Black American? Or are you?
Yeah, I'm Black American. My dad's originally from Detroit. My parents, my mom is from Tuskegee, Alabama. Okay. Both sides of the family go back to enslaved folks, to the point where like the history disappears. Yeah.
And you weren't doing the thing in Jamaica because like you were.
Yeah, I don't have Jamaican roots necessarily, but you know, as a queer person, as someone who was like really concerned with like the really violent transphobia and homophobia there, I was like, I really want to tell this story, and like documentaries are heartbreaking anyway, and that was like 2011 was the last documentary I attempted because that process was just so heartbreaking. There's stories of people that I captured who are now dead. Yeah. And because we were never able to get the funding for that project, like that story was never told. And I actually believe that documentary will live again. I know that I am like permanently burned out on it, but like my dream honestly is to just like hand it to like an executive producer and another director and be like, finish the story. Like, here's all the footage, finish this. Because I think it's necessary still. I mean, things have shifted in better ways, but like, you know, when we went there, we ended up interviewing, and I'm forgetting the name right now. It's not an ambassador because it's another Commonwealth country, but the representative from the UK who was there. And we got to interview him, the equivalent of the ambassador. And I was like, you know, what are your theories about why homophobia is so virulent here? And he was like, oh, it's our fault. And I was like, I couldn't believe the British. And I was like, I'm getting this like government official saying this on camera. That's wild to me.
Oh, I mean, yeah.
But I, you know, as we're sitting in this like colonial mansion that is the British embassy there, or the High Consul, I think it's what it's called. But yeah, so I mean, you know, it goes back to that because you look at these like so many amazing West African traditions where there's like more than two genders, there's all kinds of queerness, and then colonialism comes and like you have, and then what's unfortunately happened is you get these really violent strains of homophobia and transphobia that we see now. I heard a comedian once say that the Rastafarian religion itself is pretty homophobic. Is that accurate? From my experience there, from the people I interviewed, I would say absolutely yes. Okay. As far as like, you know, the music as well, it was pretty intense. But yeah, like even that documentary I was trying to do in a more experimental way. Okay. There was all these, you know, people who had stories that they couldn't be on camera to tell, or people who had been killed. And so we collected all these stories, and the idea was we'd come back to the US and then have storytellers kind of be their voices, and do that in kind of like a much more artistic way. And yeah, so, but that project really was kind of like my last straw. I was like, right, I want to do this in another modality. Yeah. The industry, whether it's narrative fiction or narrative documentary, like nonfiction, is not really the space for me. It's not clicking in the way, and that just broke my heart. That project broke my heart. And so, yeah, starting to like kind of re-explore through revisiting my video art roots in a more pure form, and kind of like, this is just going to be within gallery space. I'm not interested in kind of like modifying it or watering it down for the film industry. And then getting to build installation, that freedom that came with that was incredible. Yeah.
how is that's the 2011, so like now what is, like, for example, the piece that you just had at Torrance, what are you working with, like, conceptually there?
Yeah,
because I've only seen video of it, but it's for people that aren't familiar, it's like a projection on cloth, so it's a projection on an installation, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So I worked with Jack X Proctor. She's an incredible photographer, installation artist in her own right, also a fantastic filmmaker. So we created this kind of fabric sculpture, and then projected using 4 projectors onto it, a 5th onto a piece of fabric by the door. And we were sort of just really experimenting with like the places where our practices kind of merge and play. We're really interested in just bodies as artistic forms and dance and movement. The piece is called Amniosis. We're really interested in kind of like that neutral state of being that's in the womb. So the piece should have felt a little womb-like. And in the piece, 3 performers kind of move through a space that we created using that same fabric before we turned it into the sculpture, where their bodies are covered in kind of a layer of second skin that we created out of a mixture of like glue and face mask gel. Okay. And they're peeling it off of each other. And this kind of, rediscovering of self, the collision, that's both like, at times intimate, potentially violent between the individual self and the collective self. So we were talking about, with the performers, this is collision and caress that's happening. And so I think we were just playing with all of those elements visually. When I look at a lot of my work, and that kind of like, it connects with some of my work, but it sort of stands alone as an island in that kind of little experiment. A lot of my work really is interested, and this goes back to why I want to do installations, in creating Black queer otherworlds. So I want you to be able to walk into one of the spaces and be pulled into kind of this like temporary alterity, the space that exists sideways of us, parallel of us.
Like an alternate universe.
Like an alternate universe, exactly.
Sorry to make it comic booky.
No. Look, I'm a sci-fi and fantasy nerd. I'm
sorry, I should not have assumed. I know a lot of gay men love that shit too. In fact, most of my nerdy friends happen to also be gay.
So I want there to be spaces for like that queer exploration and like queerness as that kind of fluid space, right? Like one of the reasons I love queer, it becomes like indefinable. Like, it covers, those of us who identify as fluid and all kind of in between as well. And there's also that political implication that queer is subversion. Like to me, it's more than an identity marker. It's a political statement.
How do you feel about that today, though? Like nowadays, when that's actually, this is really interesting. I feel like with so many other things, corporate America is kind of co-opting it. When you have CIA doing like pro-queer, do you feel like it can stay subversive in
Absolutely. Like I refuse to let go of the word. Like we fought for that word, in the same way. Interesting. Yeah, and and so like for me, it's just like whatever you do. Because here's the thing, in certainly like our hyper-capitalist world, and I think this applies for the arts too, anything that is subversive will be co-opted. It'll absolutely be co-opted. And at some point, you got to stop running and trying to build new things and just go, no, this is where we hold.
That's
And I think I feel that about queerness. I feel that about so many other things, about kind of Black identity, the use of woke. Like, let's reclaim the use of woke, because like staying staying woke was about like being aware of where you couldn't go in the South. Like stay woke, don't drive through there. Stay woke, be awake, be aware of that. And when you got woke, you became, as a Black person, aware of
when was this?
White supremacy. We're talking like 40s, 50s, 60s, right?
Because it's been what I understood it to be was like the 5%ers, the Nation of Islam.
There's
so that's also been
So there's like a journey of that.
Yeah,
but it's just like
but that makes sense. That
exactly. And so there's always like this eternal co-option, and I think you just go, nope, like queerness is this, and
I think as I'm sorry, there's an aircraft carrier like flying through. I don't know what the fuck, but I think queerness is an interesting one because it's not like a term like progressive, because like progressive also, like progressives used to believe in eugenics way back, and so it's an interesting term. Like that one, I don't mind letting go, because I'm a lefty.
Yeah.
I
consider myself a lefty. That's fine.
You guys can be DSA all you want. Like, you're still to the right of us. But I do think but as somebody that as somebody who sees that as an outsider, but somebody that was I don't want to take fake street cred, but I grew up when homophobia made even straight people really uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And it was tormenting to even have a question about that.
Absolutely.
So I relate to the queer movement from that standpoint.
Yeah.
And watching it sort of get co-opted, there's this really interesting thing where I think that the queer people I know are cool. And then there's this representative thing that's happening with CIAs and
Right.
stuff like that. And I almost feel like it's intentionally made because you're not supposed to like the CIA. So
Right.
if you're homophobic and the CIA is pro queer, you're like, oh yeah. Is that too paranoid-y?
I don't know. I think a certain level of paranoia is absolutely valid. Here's the thing is that I think there's always a level of homonormativity that comes with co-opted queerness.
Homonormativity?
Yeah, we are the same as you. We want to get married. We want to have the white picket fence. We want to have kids. We're not all that different from you.
Okay.
I think it's a really simple distillation of homonormativity. It is, I'm probably going to get bad at an academic dissection of it, so I'm not going to try. But essentially, the movement within LGBT folks to be as normal as possible, be seen as not different.
Yeah.
Whereas queerness is about no.
Yeah.
No, actually, maybe I don't want to get married. Maybe I don't want to have kids. Maybe I want to have multiple partners of multiple genders. I don't Can we subvert all of this?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beautiful thing about queerness. And that's the thing that's going to be hard to co-opt because that's still on the bleeding edge of things. And so when you talk about that queerness is fuck you.
Yeah.
That embodied spirit. That's the thing that I find so powerful.
That's what I relate to as the Gen Xer,
right.
Coming up and just being just being confused by the whole thing. But I also think there's an interesting thing, and I feel like I'm comfortable talking with you about this. There's no gay country. Right? That the CIA can sort of, invade.
Right.
So, I mean, we can leave it there. But okay, let's go to safer climates. But yeah, so okay, let's talk a little bit about more what these all. I had a guest one time talk about Latinx futurism.
Yeah,
is that similar?
Yeah, I'm
in
absolutely interested in Black Futurity. In grad school, my thesis was all about moving sideways to move forward. So using that right there.
Buy this book. See, I'm already getting ready to have sponsorships and stuff, even though I'm still very small.
I love it. Yeah,
go pick this up.
Yeah, because I'm
my
the person.
Honey to kin.
But I'm the person who decided to do a whole monograph on top of my actual gallery installation.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. Who doesn't want a monograph?
Yeah, exactly.
I love monographs.
But
it fits so well on coffee tables.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, to me, Black Futurity is really interesting, and I really
Futurity. What's the difference?
So yeah,
Futurism versus Futurity.
Yeah, so Jose Esteban Munoz, who wrote Cruising Utopia, which I have on the shelf there, defines futurity as the practice of looking back at what our ancestors did well, and he's speaking specifically in the context of queerness, and he's talking about kind of a pre-AIDS queerness and going, how can we reclaim that? How can we bring those practices into our world now? And then what we want the future to look like, and then building our own set of actions based on those two kind of metrics.
Okay.
These past things from our ancestors, these future things that we want our descendants to kind of live in that world, and then our actions today to kind of build that future.
All right. Now that the work outside is done, let's just restart and do the whole episode over.
Okay,
Does
sure.
that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been waiting to get quiet to do that, and then the longer it took, I was like, oh yes. No, so okay, so then, what? So then you're. What I mean I know it's a big ask, but what do you have a 5-point plan? Sorry to make it that dumb, but
no absolutely.
What are the movements or the steps into something like this?
I think there's so many different pieces of it.
Mm-hmm.
People living it into different ways. So alterity and futurity are often seen kind of as, I wouldn't say diametrically opposed. I don't want to say that, but like kind of perpendicular to each other. So because alterity is kind of your Sun Ra thing, right? Like, people call Sun Ra the father of Afrofuturism. I think he would actually hate that because he didn't believe in time in that way, or at least he said he didn't. He was like, he literally was like, at my concerts, you're going to Saturn. Like, you're coming with me into space. You're in space right now. And that's kind of an alterity, right? That's kind of, it's almost a little more woo-woo in a way that I like. It's mystical. Like, you're stepping directly into this other world. And futurity is about that kind of like practical building, taking these lessons and building.
I just want to point out that the woo-woo part is like something that like secularism has made like kind of cringe, but...
Right. This is going to pull me aside, but Robin D.G. Kelley, who's an amazing scholar, if you haven't read, a Black socialist scholar, talks about how all the forms of Marxism, communism, socialism don't work for Black people because the woo-woo isn't there, the spirituality, the mysticism. And Surrealism as a political movement is what works within Black context because it connects us back with the mystical and the spiritual that our radical roots are tied into. But that's...
No, but I mean, that's a clip.
Yeah.
Like, thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, so that's where... I mean, a lot of my practice is coming in from that space too. So how do we move sideways? How do we move in that alterity, take the lessons from that, and then move forward? So I don't know that I have a 5-point plan, but in creating my spaces, I'm hoping to keep pushing specifically Black queer imaginations, Black and Indigenous imaginations towards illegibility. Because I think...
Illegibility.
Yeah, I think like, Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color often, like minoritized folks, are illegible to white supremacist imagination. Like
are not legible from
not
the
legible.
Like they don't register.
Well, their fullness doesn't register.
Okay.
Like we are not,
sense.
We are seen as these two-dimensional characters. Anything beyond that is illegible to white supremacy. We are only legible to white supremacy in the way that it uses us, and and nothing beyond that. And this is why, like, there's the term rival geographies coined by Edward Said and then refined by the Black scholar Stephanie M.H. Camp, and she uses it in the context of like in the Deep South. If you were an enslaved person, you're not escaping. Let's just accept that fact. Like, it's going to be very hard. You're way too far south. And what people would do is go truant. So they would disappear for a week, a month, a few days, however, just to take a break. Yeah. Just knowing that when they came back, torture would face them, but that break was worth it. And here's the thing. She's in her work, she looked at research and the statistics from that. Most people went truant were never found. So they literally created a second geography over this geography of confinement in which they were able to slip away and disappear.
Where would they disappear to?
Into caves, sometimes into attics that were right there on the plantation. But because white supremacy and like plantation mentality only saw them in a certain way, their fuller selves were completely illegible. Going truant also meant like, enslaved people from multiple plantations would like steal the dresses and the fine clothes that they had made for those plantation owners and go party at night and then bring them all back. So it's just like these ways of creating these like spaces that were again like temporary, but these temporary reprieves, these beautiful kind of like places of rest where freedom could be sought. And so I'm really interested in like, how do we take those lessons right now and apply them? Because we're still in need of those places where freedom can be sought. And so I think my contribution to that is like, let me create these spaces where we enter and have our imagination pushed in ways, and then you can join in that process too. So that's
I wish I hadn't just seen the videos. It looked really beautiful. Like I said, I've just not been in a space to like go see shows. But now I'm like, fuck, man. It sounds really interesting. Okay, so then can I circle back and it like. So I think that like nowadays the term radical is not treated the same way. Like after the war on terror and all of that, like it is akin to terrorism. Yeah. So would you say that like queer is you're using queer in that sense of radicalism, defiance and stuff like that?
Subversion, the upending of existing systems.
And what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think it looks like a lot of things. So I think...
No, I mean to you specifically. To me specifically. Like specifically, like how do you embody that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways in which I embody that. So I think, one, in my work, I'm imagining worlds without white supremacy. So just that imagination. I think often what happens in activist spaces is, and I certainly know this, we get really upset about things, which we should. Anger is great. It's pure burning fuel. I think working off of rage is really important, but we stop there. I want people to imagine what we're fighting for and what we're working for. And often, like, people don't have an imagination of that. So if I can contribute a small thing, maybe it's that. Maybe it's our imagination of what lies beyond that point, what we can push towards.
Yeah.
Because at some point, the anger, like a clean burning fuel, burns fast and burns out, and you're just left burnt out.
Well, I mean, if you look at even like the radicals, like the yippies, like they got
yeah, right.
They just like, there is almost something that's maddening about it, like about being rebellious, because they just wear you down.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Like, do you have any examples? I'm sorry that all my examples are so like white, but are there people like that you would think of, like Abby? Like, is there like a black Abby Hoffman aside from like Fred Hampton, or do they?
I mean, I immediately thought of Fred Hampton. All of the Black Panther leaders, all of those folks, like, the leaders of SNCC, like those folks, I think are great examples.
And then like heroin and crack is how they did that, right?
Yeah, and just straight up assassinations.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. Yeah, and now again, referencing the thing, the co-opting is, you got the Martin Luther King FBI using Martin Luther King quotes when they tried to get him to kill himself.
I was in Detroit, and I walked past the Rosa Parks Federal Building, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Yeah. That's right. But so like, the rage is important. The rage can't be the only thing. And I'm certainly not, like, going back to Robin D.G. Kelly, he talks about the marvelous, and the marvelous is his space of surrealism, the space of beauty and poetic living and mystical living that is this thing that we push towards and work towards. And part of the thing that is exciting about it is that none of us have it defined yet. We're all just like putting together little pieces of it. So my stuff is, I create speculative rituals, and these rituals that exist in a space where Blackness is like fully reclaimed its indigeneity, because we are displaced indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
And what does that look like for us to kind of return to those spaces and celebrate kind of the syncretism that's within those mystical traditions?
Words are so fucking good. What's syncretism?
So syncretism is...
They sound like another word.
I'm also just like... I'm always nervous that I'm just like being like... I don't know, an asshole. And just
no, you're teaching. In what's my thesis, I'm here to learn, and so use all the words that I don't know. But what's tripping me out is how close they are to like it's like the difference between equality and equity.
Right. No,
which
exactly.
I don't even really know. So don't explain equality and equity. I can Google
no. I would. Syncretism is really the space where practices are melded together, like religious practices, spiritual practices. It can be other practices too, but like I'm speaking specifically. Whereas like you look at like Black Christianity, and there's so much that comes from like West African religion too.
Yeah. Well,
absolutely, I mean,
there. Like, I'm Cuban, bro. The whole thing of the Santeria is just like
voodoo. These are all perfect examples of syncretism, where these like you have this meshing that creates a hybrid.
But even Christianity itself, like I grew up in Rome. I'm like, yo, you guys have martyrs that turn into like semi-deities.
100%,
like it's crazy, and then they become like the patron saints of the like. It's it is like it to me that compartmentalization of control. And like I just talked to someone you might not know who Chelsea introduced me to, and like one of the things that's insane to me is just as an example, BCE is such an interesting academic exercise because it's like you're rebelling against the Christian Gregorian calendar, but you're also, there's an erasure there, and like I love the smile on your face. Yeah. I feel like we there's something about that third culture child kid where you just like touch on the edges of it, and you're like, oh yeah. And I do want to hear a little bit more. I mean, I'm fascinated with what we're talking about right now. Yeah. But the point with the BCE, so that we explain it to the broader context to everybody that's not in our little mind meld, but like. That is like it's like Satanism, like right. Satanism is inherently tied to Christianity because it doesn't exist without it, right? It is a reaction to it. Yes. And so like there's like this academic secularism that I think what is it? Syncretism. It does not allow for syncretism, and it kind of like I feel like there's like this intellectualism about transcending like humanity to an extent.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, so in that, I'm interested in that play, pushing that, creating these rituals that don't exist yet, thus speculative rituals. And in those rituals also celebrating, because I think often when we get back to like that homonormativity, we're normal, we don't, but also this kind of respectability of politics. And I want to push against that and go, no, we will embrace the erotic, the hedonistic, we'll embrace those forms of beauty as well, and we'll intertwine them with the spiritual. And I think there's something really important in that kind of reclamation in the work. And like, I want to walk a fine line. Like, I want to be careful in how I'm doing that, but I think it's really important and beautiful to do. And I love getting to work with folks in my queer community in doing that.
So, like, is that mostly your circle now? I mean, your inner circle, I mean.
Yeah.
Obviously, you like, we know each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's most of the inner circle for sure. And then, like, folks, you know, at some point I was like, oh, yeah, here's my token straight friend. And then, like, 3 years later, they come out. So.
Oh, my God, the conspiracies are right.
So, you know, I think there's a beauty to that. We also find each other. There's ways, like, there's so many people I knew in undergrad, and we just, like, clumped together. And then when we all came out, like, years later, it was like, I see. Yeah. And like, to me, again, like, going back to that queerness, like, I like the fact that it defies things. It's like, you know, I also identify as bisexual, but I like that queerness of being like, we are like, this is hard to define. I also like bisexuality because like it pushes against the binary. It's like my gender and other genders, and it just like opens up a universe of possibilities.
I also like it queer because it's like, what the fuck does it matter who I
exactly.
like, you know?
Yeah.
Which is I mean, I think if I had been born later, it may be a term that I think the homophobia that I grew up around with.
Yeah.
Like I think I would like, with the Gen Z culture, I would probably be defined differently. Not necessarily like bisexual or anything like that, but I think that like, I think just for my generation, like I won't take the name queer.
Yeah,
because
I'm an elder millennial, and so like I grew up with a lot of that same homophobia too, which is really intense.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like not a millennial by 1 year, so
right, yeah.
So we're probably much closer than me and my brother. But it's interesting to me, like to me, it's comforting how that line has moved.
Yes.
You know, like, but I also want to ask, because like for me, that home is Latin American people. You know, like as much as I like people of other cultures, I'm not like anti-white in a way that's become very popular here. Right. Like we still have white people on the show, and like they are the majority of the art scene. Like
that's true.
It takes effort to avoid white people.
Yeah.
But I don't do it because I'm not against that. But the place that I come, like, it's not even Spanish speaking Latino people. It's a cultural element. Yeah. You know, like, do you bond more with the queer community than you do with your black community? No?
I love black people. I love being black. I love being queer. And this is something that is like difficult, but like, I think my central community is my like black queer community.
Okay.
And like, I think there is a stereotype that black folks are more homophobic than other folks. That's not true.
Yeah. No, I have not found that.
But
rap music was homophobic. But that's rap music.
Yeah. And like, and there's so many other things in rap. Like there were so many other subversive strains that, you know, of queer folks doing that thing. But anyway, that's a rabbit hole.
Well, like even Lil Nas X now, you know. So 100%. it's not like, in fact, it was odd that was like revolutionary. Yeah. You know?
Well, and so, someone made the point that like, you know, in the black community, your church organist or pianist was like generally a gay man. So like there was like a level of like, we don't talk about it, but this is within.
Same shit with us.
The point being though, like that doesn't mean that there are still uncomfortable places where I have to like sort between my blackness and my queerness. And that's a really difficult and painful thing because I love both equally.
But I find that
they're so intertwined for me.
But I find that interesting because even like myself as a third culture kid, you grew up in Asia and all of that. Like it's interesting the sense of community that is like inherent in that, you know, like in being around people that like I'm talking about even conservative Latinos I feel comfort with, you know, because I can understand. I get
that. Yeah, no, in Detroit, I had some difficult conversations that like sometimes ended in tears for me with more conservative members of my family, and yet there's still a bond there, an understanding, a common language, a common experience, and
like it's almost like you, like I don't know. Cuban culture is very specifically like there's even in Santeria there's like two disciplines. There's one that's like open to homosexuality and stuff like that, and then I forget which one is which, but these come from like Nigerian traditions, right? Like the Igbo. Or no, I think that I'm conflating that with Gozia's tribe, but the Ifunques, like the Babalaos, that's where that tradition comes from. So it's really interesting, like how Cubans see blackness,
right?
Even the ones that are out here in Miami and maybe get the ire of a lot of liberals, like they have a pride in Africa. Like what's it called? Not Selena. What Bemba Colorada? What's Celia Cruz? Like huge pop star that everybody respects it. So and the music, like, so there's this reverence to, like, despite the history of slavery, there is still a reverence to the culture, which it feels different than over here, because there are like non-black, non-Afro-Latinos that, or non-Afro-Cubans that participate in Santeria, which is like deeply rooted in this thing, which is like, it's paganism essentially, in this really beautiful way. I love paganism. I think monotheism is exhausting.
There's a pagan book of prayer on my shelf in the other room.
But and I think that we also have that like ritual element that I think but I also get that from, like, that is like part of, like, not to be problematic, but like that is an African heritage that Cuban culture is proud of and inherently like part of it, whereas like everybody's like, Cubans are all white, and I'm like, there's a whole island full of black Cubans that didn't get away.
Exactly. You know? No, I mean, like the circles, the intersecting circles is so interesting to me. Like I think of my work often as concentric circles. Like at the center is like black queer folks, and that's who the work is for. And everybody else, like, if you're black, you're going to appreciate it, and maybe not as much, but you're going to appreciate it. And then it just kind of moves in the circle. So if you're like white cishet male coming in from like Euro descent, like there are things you're going to appreciate, and there's also going to be things, again, that are illegible to you. My thesis work, Black Honey, or an Exuberance of Drapetomania, is the entire title of that. For those who don't know, drapetomania is, or was, the disease that plantation psychologists diagnosed slaves with, or enslaved people, when they wanted to escape. They basically said, you must have a disease, a mania, to want to escape.
What is the name again?
Drapetomania.
Drapetomania. Oh,
Drapetomania. Man. So drapeto is the Greek word for an escaped slave.
Okay.
And so I think I'm pronouncing that right, drapetomania. But I thought, well, if it is this desire for freedom, this mania for freedom, then why not an exuberance of it? So the whole title of my work is Black Honey, or an Exuberance of Drapetomania. And there was a permission structure around the installation. So the installation consisted of 3 3D printed bowls filled with milk, and there was a film, a ritual, projected into each of those from the ceiling. And then they were inside fabric chambers. If you were black or indigenous, you could walk in. And I think right next to you, there's some gourd lamps. So those are some models of that, but you could pick up a gourd lamp, and walk into the space. Those are like just, those aren't fully like built out to be the lamps yet. But you could walk into the space with that as kind of a comfort object.
And I just broke it.
Thankfully, that's a corn-based plastic. It's
I am not good at this.
it's pretty sturdy.
I'm going to put it right there.
So you could walk in with that. If you were not black or indigenous, you had to ask the permission of a black person that you knew. Don't ask black people you don't know. Don't bother black people you don't know to enter the space. And even if you could, in the context of that installation, you couldn't pick up the lamp. And so it was really interesting to see people navigate that and explore that, and like their discomfort with it. And my big thing was like, we're not policing this. I'm not going to police that at all. I'm really curious as an experiment of like to see just how people react and move through the space. And so creating these circles, creating these permission structures, creating ritual spaces, that's all really interesting to
me. What's it called? Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, they walked in and they just took a lantern and they were like, what?
Right, exactly. 100% yes. So, I mean, and it's interesting because I had someone challenge me during the opening, and they were just like, well, don't you think this is like exclusionary? And I think this person expected me to get defensive and be like, oh, no, no, no. And I was like, yeah, it is. And then they didn't know what to say to me. They're just like, oh.
Well, I've seen stuff like this before, but I like your approach to it. I saw one that I didn't like, which was at the Venice Biennale. I forget what year. It was like way, way, way back. There was the Spanish pavilion. You couldn't get into it if you didn't have a Spanish passport, and like whatever, like
right,
that,
right.
you know. Yeah. But in this case, so that's like maybe more of a commentary on immigration. But I like the structural dynamics that you're doing, and I like people that are not agreeable. I think I'm telling you, I like your politics, Leslie. I think I have much to learn from you, because it's interesting. Like you have this, like, obviously I don't understand the Black perspective at all, right? Like as much as I try, I don't. But I also don't really understand the queer perspective. I have a little bit more kinship with it, I think, because of like this insane homophobia that we grew up with that affected even straight cis people. Yeah,
right. If you were anything other than like this specific standard, you were
scared, like, you know, exactly. And I remember bands like Pansy Division and all of that. Like, so, but what I find really interesting is that instead of it being like a neoliberal bent on all of these things, which is like kind of the overwhelming, frustrating thing in both camps, in both like my inability to access like Black experience and my inability to access queer experience, like, the leftist perspective on it, the like, because there's an implied benevolence,
right,
that it is inclusive of people outside of this space, and it's an instructional thing, but it's also, you're saying it's okay for me to make art for a very small audience, and if you guys can't grasp that, I think that's insanely interesting.
Yeah, and that's fine. Yeah, I'm okay with it.
No, I'm saying like that. It's an amazing. It's I think it must be empowering as a person to like make really art that like only your people will understand.
And it was fun getting to that point to like finally like push past the fear and be like, yeah, this is how we're doing this. And it's kind of exciting to be in that space.
So how long have you been in this comfort zone?
I'd say I really started pushing into that around 2018, 2019. And so then somewhat recent, 5 years or so.
5 years is still a long time ago.
The pandemic squeezes time in a way that just feels like yesterday, but you're right.
Oh, for me, it makes it feels like it was a decade ago. The pandemic was long for me.
My whole time elapsed there. Like it just like disappeared. I'm just like, yeah, but last year was 2019, right? Like I completely like forgotten that like this thing happened.
But I also want to, so let's go back into the culture, third culture thing, because I also find it really interesting how universal the experience that you share with the people that you gravitate towards. Despite, like, I mean, are they all third culture kids?
No, they're not. Like, one of my partners is a third culture kid, so that's like, shout out to them. Like, that's, there's some resonance there. But no, like, I'm the only third culture kid in my group of friends, or one of a few.
So that's really interesting to me, because I also find that, despite, I actually find like the abuelitas, I love talking to abuelitas. Spanish is such a powerful tool, because you get to really see what the people that like every 4 years, everyone's like, vote for the most vulnerable person, I'm like, you don't know what they want,
Right.
Like Honduran like abuelitas are so, I mean, they're not, I'm assuming like sometimes some of them are just old women that don't have kids and generations under them, but that there's like something to that, like the shared language where you can actually talk to people that maybe can't speak or can't represent themselves in the English language the same way. And I find that one of the most maddening things in LA is that disconnect between people that are not from here, come here, and then they're like the white savior for like the whole community, while they also gentrify the community.
Right.
And it's like, it really, it's one of those things like, and that I feel, and they don't even hear.
No.
and so that's why like I feel like there's just an unspoken thing, you know. We have the third culture kid, which I already like that there is a comfort there.
There's
like
absolutely a comfort.
We didn't even live in the same countries, but I know that you know what America looks like from the outside of the world.
Absolutely.
And that is like a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Something that I think I don't know. This might be a few different tangents, but just pulling.
Go for it, dude. Don't worry about the cameras.
Yeah.
This is going to be a good episode already. So let's just go until we're tired.
All right, sounds good.
Unless you have something to do later. But I'm really learning. a lot.
Yeah. No, let's go for it.
You don't get to ask these questions in normal, polite conversation. So I'm like, I'm chomping at the bit.
So yeah, like I mean, the two things that came up to me were going back to, just that kind of like otherness, outsiderness, and then I went back to legibility, and I was just thinking about the fact that like you were talking about like these folks come in, they don't even hear it, right?
Yeah.
They kind of speak, and I was just thinking about like how while the Haitian Revolution was happening, French leftists could not, like French people in general, but French leftists too, could not wrap their heads around it. They're like, no, black people aren't capable of this.
Yeah.
And like to them, the revolution was illegible to the point where like they almost like didn't even freak out about it because it just didn't exist for them. Like it was so beyond their bubble of understanding.
And
right?
there's a distinction between the Haitian Revolution and the coups.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly. But yeah,
even the one that Hillary Clinton pulled off recently.
It was so outside of their epistemology that they're just like, I can't, you know? And so you had all these French intellectuals just like not, I mean, one of my favorite stories about this is the fact that, you know, so you have the initial revolution in the late 1700s. Napoleon sends folks back. Napoleon loses more generals in Haiti than during like any other campaign in Europe, which I think is fascinating. But
because the one that he's famous for losing people is when he went into Russia.
Yeah, right.
But
and more.
And more than that.
And he, you know, the French soldiers have been taught to expect that like these enslaved folks actually really do want to come back, and once they see our force, they'll lay down their weapons because black people are cowards. They don't actually fight like that. This was a fluke.
Yeah.
And instead they face such an intense, you know, barrage of resistance that eventually they lose to. But there's a story that at one point Haitian soldiers, these revolutionaries, are charging a fort. And the French soldiers are firing at them. People keep charging, and the French soldiers, so amazed by the courage, drop their weapons and start applauding, which is like one of the most French stories you could. But yeah, like
they do respect that,
right? But again, there's that illegibility that I cannot wrap my head around that, and then.
Well, I think that oddly enough, and you tell me if you think this is a fair comparison, because obviously there's not anybody dying in this situation, but I feel like that's how we read French like protests over what's it called, over retirement. Like it doesn't make sense because culturally I mean obviously it's not the same kind of illegibility.
Yeah.
But it's that speaks, I think, more to like the frustration that I have with people, where it's like, dude. Go ahead.
I was like, the other thing that like that just triggered in my thought is like, and this is my personal hobby horse. So, but I think my concern and often frustration with white leftists specifically in the U.S. is that everything becomes equated with economics.
Yeah.
If we fix economics, everything else works. Class reductionism. Yeah. Without an understanding that these other issues are not secondary, they are just as primary. And so, and I think this is why, going back, I guess I'm citing Robin D.G. Kelley a lot, but Kelley is amazing. But like, you know, that's why he ultimately talks about like Black revolutionaries have to embrace surrealism. Yeah. Take the lessons you can from Marxism, take the lessons from these things, but these are ultimately like white born concept. And he's like, you know, can't we look at sources within the African continent for some of those same concepts and the same ideas that go much further back? How do we build from that? How do we research and like dig into that? And I think that's really fascinating. That's certainly something that like I've been researching, is like, who are people within my lineage, or my assumed lineage anyway, because, you know, enslaved history is so intertwined, but West African lineage, who were the intellectuals like back before the Europeans came, who were like thinking and talking about and building the same things? You know, you're talking about some of the greatest universities in the world, on the African continent? Who are the intellectuals there? What concepts are they coming up with? How do
which universities are you talking about?
Timbuktu was a university, and during the Byzantine Empire, you had universities in Northern Africa. I suspect there were probably institutions even further, I think also there's this thing that happens in the continent where like a lot of the intellectual weight gets put on like kind of the top part of the continent and not the sub-Saharan, but there is all kinds of brilliant stuff happening in the sub-Saharan too. But that's stuff that still like feels like lost to history for me. So I'm like, how do I dig into that? How do I research that? And then how do I, in a respectful way, but also in a way that acknowledges that these are likely my ancestors, pull that into my work?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard to. I like what I like about the alternative or alternality
or alterity.
Alterity. Yeah. What I like about that is that it is almost maybe like the only way to accomplish some of these spaces. You know what I mean? At least within your own lifetime,
for sure.
Which is like validating, like self-validation, which I'm super big on. Yeah. Because it's like. Man, if I need the system to validate me, like, what is validating? Yeah. But even if it does, like, what have I done?
That's a great point. Yeah. And I mean, now I'm working within academia, and that's always an interesting balance, right? Like, I'm an assistant professor, and I'm on a tenure track, and like, what does that mean for me? And like, when do I get sucked into the system, and when do I shut up? Like, and like, and maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic, but I think there's an assumption for me that at some point I need to maybe just like sit back and like other people do it because I'm too far into the system. Maybe that's not going to happen, but it is a fear of mine for sure.
I think there's a legitimacy to like what we talked about. I'm going to use like my white radical like reference points, but like that's what happens to people like Abby Hoffman. I mean, he's Jewish, so he's not like a WASP, but like. It's crazy to it's probably a really helpful exercise to take time to imagine the world as a different place, right? Like as a healing ritual.
Absolutely.
And to some degree there might be some manifestation in there because, like now we're talking about what's the other word that you taught me? The
syncretism.
Syncretism.
Yeah. Like the kind of bringing in of those religions.
We need a glossary for me.
Well, and like I also want to just like shout out, like there's an author named Becky Chambers who coined the term hope punk.
Okay.
Right? Which I love. And her books are, not all of her books, but a lot of her books are about like imagining this world. Like she has a series called The Monk and Robot Duology. So it's 2 books. And in this series, the world in which you live, it's not Earth, but it's an equivalent to Earth, is a place that had its late stage capitalism, that had its environmental collapse. And people, just before it's too late, were like, we can't do this anymore. And so instead of being in the world at the point of crisis, you enter the story 500 years in the future where people have figured it out.
Yeah. And
it's nice getting to like, it was honestly like, I was reading it while I was at Skowhegan actually, and I was just like, so nice to be in this world. I was like, this is beautiful. Yeah. That like, and I there's critiques of, it's not realistic, it's not this. I'm like, who cares? Yeah. Like, let's build these worlds here so that we can start like, I think this is like talking about being a nerd, like Star Trek, right? Like Star Trek imagined, for all its flaws, imagined worlds that didn't exist and gave people this idea of hope. Yeah. And I think dystopias are really important as warning signs. And I think a lot of my early work was more dystopian. I mean, right, I'm coming of age, as an artist around 9/11.
I think dystopianism has maybe fallen out of favor too because we live in one, and you want to escape when you read. Yeah. Whereas like dystopianism in the 90s was fucking the shit. Like Snow Crash.
Though I would also argue that Black and Indigenous people have lived in dystopias forever.
Oh yeah,
we're post-apocalyptic people in some ways. We've already had our apocalypse.
100%. I have family that live here.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That I'm never gonna meet.
100%.
So I definitely am with you on that.
But there is a broader cultural thing, right?
Yeah. I think just like in the publishing industry.
Yes, absolutely. But I do think they're important as warning signs. But that's not, there was a glut of them for a long time. And I was just like, you also have to like, you can't just like warn people. You also have to like, again, imagine what else. And I need a balance here. And I feel like even now there's not that much of a balance.
Well, I think there is a deliberate movement within that publishing world because I think people like William Gibson have started to conceive of the idea. Like, because basically the metaverse and all of that shit was heavily inspired by a book that is one of my favorite. I don't know if you've read Snow Crash.
I know of it. I haven't read it.
Neil Stephenson.
Yeah.
It's a great book. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of like as action packed as like The Hobbit was versus, where like you're reading and you're visualizing these crazy movies with all this crazy sci-fi tech. But then you've got like soulless people like Mark Zuckerberg who read it and take it as a point of inspiration.
Yes, right.
And so there are authors that have made a conscious effort to write more utopian stuff. Yeah. The one thing that I think is also interesting is because I grew up in Rome, I know how you and some of my favorite artists are the futurists, just conceptually, like because they're like right wing avant garde fascists.
Right. Yeah.
It's so fucking funny to me, like because it's like it's evil, but it's also naive in this like really like a human way.
Yeah.
But utopianism is like intrinsically modernist in a way that is terrifying.
Yes.
And leads to like there were a lot of like utopian both leftist and right wing utopias that are terrifying if you read into them.
Oh, absolutely.
Like buildings that were like
I mean, I really like the idea, and what Becky Chambers is doing with Hope Punk isn't utopian, but it's protopian. And I'm so sorry, I wish I remembered who coined that term, but protopia doesn't mean a utopia. It means 3 to 5 steps better than where we are.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that as utopianism is, great to kind of like set kind of like a gold standard of like, this is like but like I'm here for protopia and anything between that spectrum.
Yeah. Cause I do think that there's like with a lot of like as leftists, like free speech is not about like protecting people. Free speech is about protecting people. Like censorship. Yeah. Like there's never been a person that censored that was the good guy. Like it just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
So now we're like in this post-Trump like thing where people's brains broke. Like you like there is sort of this like it's almost like I'm cautiously gonna say this.
All right.
But like I feel like there is a desire to be like good and kind and feminists and stuff like that, but at the same time and anti-homophobia and all of that, but at the same time the desire to have the patriarchy be the one to impose the safety is terrifying to me.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think so too.
Speak to that.
I don't something that just hit me, and I don't see this as much right now as a teacher, although I do see it. But like, I have friends who work with Gen Z folks, sex educators, etc., who talk about like there's a scary strand of Puritanism there in Gen Z that I'm just like, no, like we fought so you didn't, and I see that within queer communities too, like where the word groomer is tossed around just as much, just for someone like walking around in leather and kink gear at Pride.
We're talking about somebody that grooms pets because we're on YouTube.
Yes.
But yeah, they do throw that term around.
They throw that term around, and I'm just like, I want us to like not retreat to this kind of like sex negative space where like you also see this movement with like a lot of young folks being like, oh, we don't want sex in movies, and I'm just like, what's going on, y'all? And so I mean, and I get it. There's always like, my grandparents are born in the late like 1917, 1918, around then. My dad is born in 1943, my mom in 1945. My paternal grandparents were much more like open and hedonistic in ways. Like
it is cyclical. It's always
very
a reaction.
Cyclical. And like my dad, like who was like the very tail end of like the war babies generation, like so he's older than a boomer. He's turning 80 in July. But yeah, like those folks tended to be a lot more buttoned up and conservative. And that's not just like my grandfather was like a massively homophobic, like kind of not great human. Yeah. But there was still this libertine aspect to him that my dad just saw as like shameful and upsetting.
So do you can I ask you like a question about the intersection of your two marginalized identities?
Yeah.
Do you find that gay people can be racist? Like
I mean, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is like
as a non-gay person, sometimes I'm like, yo, that dude is like not cool.
Here's the thing, like racism is the infection of this society. It is across the board. It doesn't matter where you are. And I also think that's the thing that like white left has to come to terms with, because they really don't like being called racist, and sometimes they're being racist.
No.
And
I
like,
agree with you.
Here's the thing for me is like, racism isn't an insult. I'm giving you a prescription.
Yeah.
Fix it.
Yeah.
Like that's
100%.
Right. Like I there is medicine that you can take for this, work on it, and instead people get really in their feelings about it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm trying to protect myself and those around me. But yeah, no, I mean like the white gay community, specifically the cis gay community, I found is like can be pretty toxic. And and I'm coming as a black person, as like someone who's bisexual, and like the sort of like tokenizing that happens, the fetishization that happens is a lot. Like it's really intense. Like I don't spend much time like doing like the WeHo thing because I just have no interest in experiencing any of that.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I feel like my own cluster is like a cluster just away. Like it's like, it's just kind of a different world because like, yeah, like you just face that all the time. Yeah, and that's not to say that's across the board. It never is.
No,
yes, it's absolutely present. Because I think, okay, I'll make my controversial statement for that. And I guess I live in a world where it's not so controversial, but this is my controversial statement.
I'm really poking, man.
Is that I think every white person in this country, and I would argue in Europe, is racist, period. And it's socialized, and you have to work through that.
I would include myself in that, in the sense of like not as like a virtue signal, but as an acknowledgement of like, yo, sometimes I think things and I don't know where they came from.
Right. This is and it's again not something to be upset about. This is how we're socialized. This is also why, if you're not white, you still have internalized racism.
Yes.
Like I'm socialized that way too. I will still have those thoughts too because it's internalized racism. And instead of people getting upset, I wish people just like work the fuck through it.
Yeah.
Right?
No. Yeah. It doesn't want to be addressed. And it is, and I think to some degree, maybe it's a cultural thing where like, that's why I try not to be like so anti-white in the dialogue of like of where I sit in the spectrum, because like I feel like if maybe being called like what you're saying, if being called a racist wasn't such an insult and more of an upbringing thing where you work through it, I would have a lot easier time with with people that don't like Arabs or anything that like it's an interesting thing to be a Rorschach test for certain people. Where you're like, because in Miami I'm Cuban as fuck,
right,
and like, but over here I'm a little Jewish, like it, and it is an interesting thing. You start to internalize some of that. Like there was a period I was like, am I Jewish? Like, do I have lineage? Yeah. My grandfather's name is Israel. I've like pretty much debunked that.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things where like you almost get gaslit into thinking that you're a minority,
Yeah.
So yeah, man. I find all of that really interesting. Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to part on? Anything that I haven't been informed enough to ask you that you maybe want to add? Because you got a lot of stuff to say, but I'm also like just a mostly white Cuban guy, or Southern European. We were like multiple generations Cuban, but that probably comes with its own problems.
Yeah. God, I feel like we've covered so much.
I do too.
And
that's
like
why
a lot of stuff that I've been hoping to talk about. Yeah. I feel like right now I'm just on the mic. I'm just working on stuff that like I'm really excited about. Like I'm excited about like expanding these worlds a little more. Like my goal, I think, is to like push towards illegibility within myself, to go like, I don't completely understand that thing anymore. And of course it's coming from my brain. So like, that's always like, illegibility is always a goal that's out of reach, but it's always a fun goal to chase, I think. Like really what I'm interested in as well is, and I think I didn't say this, but like dream space is really central to my work as well. And the kind of weird, wonderful fluidity that happens in dreams, the strangeness of dream logic, the way things shift and move in dreams, the way time is elapsed. Like, most of us have had that like 5-minute nap where you had like an epic dream that went over like a 1,000-year journey, and like I love that time works in different ways in dream. Working with video, Maya Deren called it the video artist Maya Deren, who I really deeply love, who worked in the 30s and 40s, I guess up through the 50s. Darren calls it a really beautiful and unique medium because it's allowing us to manipulate and travel through time itself as a medium. So like this all interests me, and like so dream and film always feel.
Have you ever lucid dreamed?
Yeah, I lucid dream a decent amount actually.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Do you have it as a practice?
I don't have it as a practice.
Okay. You don't do like dream journals and stuff like that?
I will journal like significant dreams, things that like stick with me. But I had nothing but nightmares until I was 7 years old.
Oh my god!
So like dream is like really important in kind of like my consciousness. But
how do you survive?
I don't know, but like it makes like people
hiccups.
who watch my work are just like, that makes sense.
That's like people that have hiccups for over a year.
Oh yeah, I have a friend who has permanent hiccups, and it's just like,
you do?
Yeah.
Oh my
like,
god!
She's had them as long as I know. Maybe they've stopped now, but it's just like part of her life at this point.
I feel for you.
Yeah. But Walter Murch in the book In the Blink of an Eye, which if you haven't read, just as like a way to think about like film editing is it's a tiny volume and it's so beautiful, but talks about the fact that the cut shouldn't work logically the way films cut, and they work for two reasons.
This one, man, the heat.
Oh yeah,
it's all good. Let's just finish up.
Yeah,
I still have that one probably.
They work for two reasons. One, when we blink, we scene change, and so the cut is the blink. But two, they move at the logic of dream. They move the way we expect a dream to be. So when we watch a movie, we go, oh, dream. Even the most kind of like realistic, rational movie still operates more at the speed of a dream than real life. Sure. And I think that's really beautiful. So part of my practice is like exploiting the dream-like aspect of that and creating the installation space. One of the other things I really like doing is like using imperfect surfaces. So I'm projecting onto like wax and fabric and like, paper. And fresco. Like I've made fresco panels to specifically project onto. So just like playing with all that stuff to like create an imperfect surface, because like I really think that like, and I've certainly had like shows where like my piece is playing on a screen and that's right for that moment and like that space.
Yeah.
But often I think the minute you have that, you suddenly have, we're so used to like holding devices in our hands, having them on our walls in our living rooms. And so to me, it's really exciting to go, what if I like defamiliarize the object just a little bit and suddenly you're in dream, because you're like, that's not right. That's not supposed to happen. Like I'm walking into the space, I'm looking into a bowl and there's a film playing in milk in this bowl. What's going on?
Like
yeah. And so like to me,
that's the surrealist element.
That's the surrealist element. And so it's about like pushing that dream and doing that specifically in service of kind of like these futures, these alterities, these like other spaces, and then building on that.
Do you have any artists that you can recommend that do surrealism in this particular what is it? Synchrony?
Oh, syncretism. Like using that kind of like religion.
That word has so many adjectives that I'm gonna have to like absorb it.
And I mean, like, with that specifically, that's again talking about religion and how you kind of merge beliefs and spiritual systems and religions. So I don't know necessarily about that.
the surrealist side.
The surrealist, the surrealist side of that. Yeah, I would say that Sharon Neshat.
Sharon Neshat.
Sharon Neshat is, I love her work so much. I think her work captures a really gentle, really powerful surreality. Using video art and installation.
My reference for surrealism is like so old. It's like Dali and like and what's it called, the apple head face guy?
Oh yeah.
We don't have to remember his name. You guys, you can comment down below.
Maya Deren, who I mentioned before, her work in film. Marie Minkin, who's like one of the early video artists. Stan Brakhage, of course.
Okay.
So these are all people that I think about in reference, but I'm also thinking about Ulysses Jenkins, who's like really messing with the form of like documentary within his video art. And I think all of these folks are using surrealism in different ways that's like informed my own practice of it. I would actually also argue, and I teach this, is that Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust is absolutely also a surrealist film. You don't, like, time doesn't really elapse or move. You're just kind of in this dream space for most of the time. There is like an A to C structure. Eventually the story sort of like moves a place, but does it actually? Is it just moving in a circle? Like you could sort of like expect someone to blink at the end of that and just start at the beginning of it and it all makes sense. And so I think these are all folks that have inspired me who are working in surrealism as well.
Cool. I really appreciate this conversation because I like you see what people post about, and I was like, I don't love to make people talk necessarily about their culture and stuff unless it comes up. But man, I really, coming into this, I really wanted to get a sense of that like queerness that that you speak of, because it is so central to like, you know, I can tell it's important to you.
Yeah.
And it's really... It's really fascinating to like get at least a glimpse. I feel like I'm on the outer sides of your performance, but
Right.
but it's been explained to me in a way that I can maybe have a better understanding. You know, like
yeah.
So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, it's been a pleasure. I've had a great time.
Oh, dude. I mean, we're friends now. I'm sorry.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially because we know so many people in common.
100%.
We're gonna have to grab a beer or something.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you so much. Anything that we can promote and plug for you?
You know, at this point, I'm sort of like, I've just wrapped up shows. I am working on a show in February, place to be determined still.
Okay,
and
so that's
from a
up.
LACE grant that I got at the beginning of the year. So that's coming up. At this point, though, not too much.
We maybe if I have you back on, or when I have you back on, if I don't even say that ever. When I have you back on, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the art, hustling the art side, because I feel like you might be a wealth of knowledge for people that are trying to navigate the art world, and
I'm
like
happy to talk about that.
And I, like that's usually what I kind of try to pick up, but we just went off on the TCK thing, third culture kid.
Love it.
Yeah, I still have so many questions about like your childhood too, like so we have a lot to talk about. Unfortunately, a podcast can only be an hour long, an hour to 3 hours long. If the cameras work, it could have been 3 hours, but I'll let you rest. You've also given me, you've burned bright. So, what's your Instagram? Leslie?
So my Instagram is Leslie, LESLIE _Muse, MUSE.
MUSE. All right. And we'll be back next week with another guest with another topic that may or may not be art related. And thank you so much for watching.